For the last few weeks, we've been delving into one of the most important amendments to our Constitution, the First Amendment. Last week, we had a really interesting chat with our guest, David Hoffman, about the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, which brought up some very interesting questions about the freedom of speech. Today, we're going to be talking on something that's a little bit peripheral, argumentatively, about the First Amendment, the Sherman Antitrust Act. And David, first of all, when we were talking about the social dilemma, can we just kind of rehash a little bit about this? There's a lot to unpack on all fronts, but when we're talking about the social dilemma and social media and how it's influencing society, should there be some government control over our social media platforms?
To kind of backtrack a little bit and remind your viewers of what it is exactly we're talking about, it's in short, it's social media companies use algorithms to push content on their viewers in order to keep them engaged longer for the purpose of gaining advertising dollars. And the real dilemma, the real issue comes with the type of content that keeps viewers the longest is misinformation, conspiracy theories, and falsehoods. Unfortunately, the truth is much more boring than made up stuff. And so that's where there's a huge sense of tribalism in this country right now. You're on this side or you're on this side. I've seen T-shirts, I'd rather be with Russia than I'd be with, we're very, very polarized. And there is I think, a pretty profound theory out there that we are this polarized because of some of the effects of social media.
And I don't think we've ever seen quite this type of polarization until so many people have been engaging on social media, because if you were just getting your news from the usual sources, I don't think we had so much discord that we do today.
Right. Well, you start clicking on one type of article, and the social media algorithms, they know that that's what this person's interested in. Did she read it all the way to the end? Did she then research and look for another one similar to that? So then they start pushing stuff, and even stuff you're not looking for is put in front of you.
They just keep feeding you and feeding you and feeding you. And there are arguably so many different social media platforms, but there are a few that are at the top of the heap. And then there are some other ones that are trying to break in when people are getting tired of what they're seeing on those main social media platforms.
Right.
And one of which we've been discussing is Parler. But Parler was taken down by Amazon. So it begs the question, well, if Amazon can take Parler down, well, couldn't these app stores take down the other ones as well?
Well, let's back up for just a second, because we did bring up the Sherman Antitrust Act. The question that comes up is there going to be regulation of these social media companies? Does the government need to step in and regulate the intentional dissemination of false information? And one legal theory that has come up is, if you'll recall, at the turn of the century, not because you were alive, but in the late 1800s, early 1900s, we had this thing called the Sherman Antitrust Act. There were industries that basically controlled our government: the railroad industry, the steel industry, the coal industry. You've heard the name John David Rockefeller. These people ran, Carnegie, they ran the country. They had such political power, and it was impossible to break into those industries. Well, the government came along with a series of laws, the Sherman Antitrust Act, that broke apart these monopolies, and it led to more people in the industry, more competition, more capitalism, free market, and it also allowed more meaningful regulation to be developed so that other people could kind of join in. That is one idea. You take Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you take some of these larger social media companies, perhaps something along the lines of the Sherman Antitrust. Now, that's just to kind of backtrack and catch everyone up to why we brought that up. That's one legal theory of how the government could step in. To answer your question about Amazon dropping Parler, well, Parler was starting to become known for hate speech, which is not really protected by the First Amendment. But even more so, Amazon is a private company. It might be publicly traded, but it's not the federal government censoring. And that's where this real battleground is going to happen in the future as far as First Amendment, because if the government's going to regulate it, then they are basically by definition violating the core principle of the First Amendment, and that is the government shall not regulate or censor speech, free speech. But to answer your question about Amazon and Parler, Amazon's private. They can keep or not keep whoever they want on their web browser, and Parler was becoming kind of a hub for hate speech. So that's why Amazon was able to do that.
And this is a good place to take a break. So when we come back, I do want to talk about, well, how do you pick and choose? Because you can see certain things that are not healthy for society on all these platforms, but we'll get into that after the break, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back. We've been chatting with David Hoffman, the founder of the Hoffman Law Firm, and we've been unpacking some really interesting ideas about the First Amendment and things that you're catching us up on our legal education here, David, which I really appreciate, because I don't think a lot of people understand how the Sherman Antitrust Act works. I think, just becoming more aware of how we digest and find our information in today's world. We need to be more aware of where we're getting it and what we're doing with it. But we wanted to also get a little bit farther into this idea about picking and choosing. I had a question for you before we went to break about picking and choosing which platforms can survive and which ones can't. And I think it's arguable that, on all the social media platforms, something that was not proper for the public to be receiving in their feeds is out there. Now it gets taken down usually, but then, Parler comes along because a lot of people saw it as the answer to another viewpoint, but they did have certain information on their site that was not healthy for society.
For anyone.
Yeah. For anyone, right?
Just hold your hate speech.
Yeah.
And the Jewish space lasers and all the other conspiracy theories out there, just hang on to those.
So Parler gets taken down, but then if the same messages are being seen on these other platforms, how come those aren't taken down?
Well, the answer is, as far as from the standpoint of what the government can do and not do, the First Amendment is government censorship. So if Apple wants to leave it up or take it down, it's their prerogative. If if Google wants to leave something up, Mark Zuckerberg, if he wants, that's where the battleground is. And that's where I think eventually that's going to be that landmark Supreme Court decision that I think one day is going to change everything, because at some point you can't keep spewing lies. You can't keep spewing stuff that results in just really a bad vibe, for lack of a better way of saying it. This just the things that have been, since this past election, the things that have been promoted as truth, when, it's just debunked on level after level after level. A really great example I can give you as far as the difference in what we talked about first segment, when Donald Trump came along and banned Twitter followers because he didn't like their comments. That was the government banning free speech. Mm-hmm. The court ruled that Donald Trump could not do that. That's the difference between Amazon doing it in a private setting and the president of the United States doing it in a governmental setting.
Right. So then Twitter took Donald Trump's account away, which now he's in the process of preparing to launch his own social media platform, by the way. But how is it that his account can no longer exist, yet the Ayatollah can still exist and spew all kinds of propaganda? So that's what I'm asking is,
it's private versus public. The people that review it are private versus the federal government. All the First Amendment's going to do.
No, but I'm talking about Twitter taking Donald Trump's account away from him, so he can no longer have an account on Twitter. That is a private company, but they're leaving other people up. who has done much more egregious things.
It's personal. It's personal decisions.
So this is where I want to come back to kind of the core of what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, and that is we as consumers of this stuff need to be more discerning. That we need to be very careful about where we're getting our information, because until you see the whole picture, which many of us are not given the whole picture, that's where that Social Dilemma documentary comes in place, because with these algorithms, you as a person, as an individual, are being fed one bit of information over and over and over again. You don't see the whole picture. You then get like this laser focused tunnel vision into that one thing and not realize, well, there's so much other stuff happening out here that you don't know about that could positively influence you.
Exactly. This is the court decision that we're going to face probably within the next 5 to 10 years, I would say.
Yes. And I don't know that I want to be one of the justices on that panel to make that decision. It's
going to be landmark. It's going to rival. It's going to be up there with the civil rights movement. It's going to be up there with Roe versus Wade. This is going to be the seminal First Amendment case that will exist, I believe.
How close are we to this, do you think?
It's gonna take somebody trying. It's gonna take a government trying to regulate political speech or something along those lines on one of the private social platforms, and going all the way up through appeals.
Goodness.
And so we're a ways away at this point, but
and as we have always said, cross-reference your information, get it from multiple sources, never just get it from one, and you'll be doing yourself a favor.
I agree. These are interesting times. They
are. David, I want to thank you again. Another really insightful couple of segments with you. Appreciate your time.
Well, I hope I didn't put everyone to sleep with the Sherman Antitrust Act, but it really is interesting. You should Google it.
Anybody who wants to be in business needs to know about this. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you as well.
We're back after this.